Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. In a pretty remarkable White House press briefing this afternoon, unexpected as well, White House Chief of Staff John Kelley weighed in on President Trump's call to the mother of a slain U.S. soldier. He also spoke about the death of his own son in Afghanistan 7 years ago. Kelley went on to sharply criticize Florida Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. He called her recent attacks on the president stunning and shameful. Kelley pointed out this is not the first time the Congresswoman has used the death of others to burnish her own profile. Watch.
I was stunned when I came to work yesterday morning and brokenhearted at what I saw a member of Congress doing. A member of Congress who listened in on a phone call from the President of the United States to a young wife. It stuns me that a member of Congress would have listened in on that conversation. Absolutely stuns me. And I thought at least that was sacred. In April of 2015, I was still on active duty, and I went to the dedication of the new FBI field office in Miami. And it was dedicated to two men who were killed in a firefight in Miami against drug traffickers in 1986. A guy named Grogan in Duke. Grogan almost retired, 53 years old. Duke, I think less than a year on the job. Anyways, they got in a gunfight and they were killed. 3 other FBI agents were there, were wounded, now retired. And a congresswoman stood up, and in the long tradition of empty barrels making the most noise, stood up there and all of that and talked about how she was instrumental in getting the funding for that building and how she took care of her constituents because she got the money, and she just called up President Obama, and on that phone call he gave the money, the $20 million to build the building. And she sat down, and we were stunned that she'd done it. Even for someone that is that empty a barrel, we were stunned. But you know, none of us went to the press and criticized. None of us stood up and were appalled. We just said, okay, fine. So I still hope, as you write your stories, and I appeal to America, that let's not let this maybe last thing that's held sacred in our society. A young man, young woman going out and giving his or her life for our country. Let's try to somehow keep that sacred. But it eroded a great deal yesterday by the selfish behavior of a member of Congress.
General Kelley spoke for about 18 minutes. His words are both poignant and tough. At times, his voice sounded like an echo from an earlier, better age, a time when there were still parts of American life untouched by partisan hatred. When I was a kid growing up, a lot of things were sacred in our country, the general said. Women were sacred and looked upon with great honor. The same was true, Kelley noted, for religion, the armed services, and the dignity of life itself. But, as he noted, that's gone. As if to prove it, the left immediately attacked General Kelley and his sentiments. CNN contributor Brian Fallon tweeted this: Kelley isn't just an enabler of Trump, he's a believer in him. That makes him as odious as the rest. Don't be distracted by the uniform, odious. In the New York Times, Charles Blow, who's an opinion columnist, added, I keep telling y'all about John Kelley. He signed up to make Trump's craziness look less crazy. That make Kelley himself very dangerous. Congresswoman Wilson of Florida, of course, agrees with all of this. John Kelley's trying to keep his job, she told Politico. He will say anything. Joining us now, Marine combat veteran, retired Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Colonel North, thanks a lot for coming on.
Good to see you, Tucker.
What did you make of this?
Well, I actually watched it. I was at Walter Reed Bethesda visiting a very ill member of the service. Stunned is the right word. Shocked, dismayed. I think it's unconscionable what she did by injecting herself into this and by making the accusations. I can tell you from personal experience, the most difficult thing in the world you have to do, and I had to do it as a casualty assistance contact officer, when we got wounded overseas during the war I was in back in Vietnam, if you got healthy enough that you could get around on crutches, they would often assign you a temporary additional duty of being a CACO. And your job was to then go around and tell the wives of your friends that they're now widows. You walk up the walk with a chaplain. It's the most difficult thing I ever did in the Marine Corps. And I know what that's like. I've also seen presidents do that. I know that President Nixon did it with friends of mine. I know that President Bush did it because I watched him do it, going to see the bedsides of dying Marines and soldiers and sailors and airmen in that same hospital I was in today, and watched him praying with those guys. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, to walk up and tell a woman that you know, and was just moments before, a day before, was the wife of a friend, that she's now a widow. I find it to be stunning that she would do this. It tells you an awful lot about what's happened, as General Kelley pointed out in that 18-minute.
So the society itself. And look, she doesn't like the president. She disagrees with him. That's obviously within bounds. There's evidence that this is entirely political, and I want to put it up on the screen. So Congresswoman Wilson's point is Trump doesn't know anything about the family and he doesn't care. To explain that, she sent this tweet. I still stand by my account of the call between real Donald Trump and Maisha Johnson. That is her name, Mr. Trump, not the woman or the wife. Now, the irony here, which has not been noted by the press, is she misspelled the widow's name in that tweet.
Yeah.
So this is deep phoniness on display, buffoonish phoniness on display.
You know, we talked earlier about the fact 30 years ago this past summer I was asked to testify. Well, actually, they subpoenaed me.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So one of the questions that was asked was, the day that you left the White House had to be the worst day of your life. And my answer was, no, the worst days of my life were when I held dying Marines in my arms. And then I had to write to the families. And then sometimes go see them after I came back myself. And what presidents go through in trying to express their condolences is such a personal and such a private and such a difficult thing. I find it stunning that somebody could criticize the president for doing what he did. I mean, Widow Johnson received a call that no one ever wants to get.
Yes.
No one ever wants to see somebody walking up their walk with a chaplain with him. And those kinds of things happen too often in war. By the way, 56 American military personnel have been killed in training since June. That number came out of Walter Reed Bethesda today. While I was up there, I asked, and that's what they told me, 56. You think about all of those people now wondering, is some person going to jump up and put it on TV and grouse about something when this is a moment of bereavement? It's a very, very personal, intimate moment, and she's wrecked it, is what she's done. She's a wrecker. Now, this Congresswoman Wilson is a wrecker.
I don't have anything to add to that. Colonel, you said it better than anyone could. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Tucker.
Well, the press has spent months searching for a Russia scandal, but in an odd twist, the scandal could be one they've had all along, or for a number of years anyway. 2010, the Obama administration approved a deal giving a Russian firm control over 20% of the American uranium reserves. It wasn't very widely noted at the time. It's turned out to be a big deal. President Trump today blasted the press for ignoring what he says is the real scandal. Watch.
If the mainstream media would cover the uranium scandal and that Russia has 20% of our uranium, for whatever reason, and a lot of people understand what those reasons may be, I think that's your Russia story. That's your real Russia story, not a story where they talk about collusion, and there was none. It was a hoax. The problem is that the mainstream media does not want to cover that story because that affects people that they protect. And it's a disgrace that the fake news won't cover it.
David DeFurry is a former State Department official. He advises the Obama campaign, advised on foreign policy, and he joins us tonight. David, I'm almost sorry we played that bite because it might give viewers the impression that this is an inherently political story. There are politics around it, but I'm interested in the policy just as an American, not as someone with political views. Why is it okay that the Obama administration approved the sale of a company that controls 20% of America's uranium reserves to the Russians, now described as our mortal enemy. Why did they do that?
Well, you're right. It's a policy issue and also a legal issue. Now, this happened in 2010. One thing I disagree with you about is it was widely known then. In fact, there were Republican members of Congress who wrote to the administration to argue that they should not approve of this. Now, we have a CFIUS process. That process has to happen any time a company is going to acquire a company that might impact our national security.
Exactly.
Most countries don't have that process. It's good that we have that process that helps us protect our national security. This deal went through that process. It's a really complex process. 12 agencies of the U.S. government are involved. 9 agency heads make the final decision. Secretary Clinton, Secretary of State at the time, was one of 9 who approved of that decision. I believe that was a bad policy decision back then. But that was 2010. Right now, it's quite different. The situation with Russia is much more extreme, and Russia poses a much more significant threat to our security.
That may or may not be true, but for the sake of the debate, I will concede your point and say that Russia is a greater threat than in the past. I don't believe that, but I know that you do. Given that, how horrifying must it be for you to read what's happened to that uranium that the Obama administration allowed the Russians to control? You have in the New York Times a Wyoming landowner on whose land some of these uranium deposits sit saying, I'm watching trucks come into my property, routinely pack uranium into drums, and truck off to a processing plant abroad. Uranium One, this company has no export license to take that uranium out of this country. It's winding up off this continent. You know exactly where it's going, to places that are dangerous to the United States. And that's all because the Obama administration, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, allowed this to happen. Why isn't that considered shameful?
Well, you're right. We have to be concerned about the export of uranium. But I think you've overstated.
Concerned? How about terrified?
You've overstated what the New York Times article says.
Well,
it says it states that there was one export of uranium. It went to Canada. And by the way,
I'm reading it right here. I'm sorry. Let me just correct it as a factual matter. I'm quoting now. A uranium spokeswoman, Donna Wickers, said that 25% had gone to Western Europe and Japan. So we know that 25% of this uranium we don't actually have any proof that it went to Western Europe and Japan. We know it left the continent. We don't know if it went to Iran or North Korea or from, where it moved on from there. We've lost control of it. That's the point.
No,
the Russians.
That you're wrong about. So first of all,
I'm right about
Western Europe and Japan are our allies. Uranium does not leave the United States without getting a export license from the
they have
Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
False. No. They have no export license. That's the whole point of the story. They don't have an export license.
Okay. We could argue about this story.
But the point of the story,
the more important point of the story is how this deal got approved. Now, with respect to the export of uranium, I haven't heard anyone say that it made it to anywhere improper. In one place,
that's not true.
In one situation, it went to Canada, and it was the trucking company that had the export license. And it's important for you to understand.
There is no export license to take this uranium out of this country, but we don't control it. The Russians do, because the Obama people and Hillary Clinton allowed this to happen. And if you think the Russia scandal is indeed a scandal, and you do, and you've argued it here, then how is this not a scandal of a much grander magnitude? This is a huge deal that threatens our national security, but nobody seems to care because it's Obama and Clinton.
But
let's be real.
But then if this is a scandal, it's a scandal for the Trump administration, because that means the Trump administration, during the Trump administration, this uranium is leaving the country without having proper licenses.
They ought to shut this down right now. I couldn't agree with you more.
So that you should be arguing against the Trump administration.
I'm arguing that anybody who's allowing this is in the wrong, and it's a threat to us. But the genesis of this, and it's ongoing to this day, is this deal. Now, the Clintons took, through their foundations, over $100 million from investors in this uranium company. How is that not quid pro quo? I don't understand. It's a deal that you yourself say was a bad deal. They approved it. The Clintons took over $100 million during that period. Why is that not an actual scandal, not a nonsense D.C. scandal?
Let's break that down. The Clintons did not take $100 million. $100 million went in charitable donations to the Clinton Foundation. And the Clinton Foundation used that money for charitable purposes.
We don't know what they used it for. That's not true.
We have their tax returns.
No, actually, we don't.
I've actually reviewed their tax returns.
Okay. I've seen their tax returns too, but to say it went to charitable endeavors, the point is they control it. It went to their foundations. And why do you think by the way, why do you think investors in a uranium company would be giving $145 million to the Clintons? Honestly, no. Like, let's stop.
These are American, Canadian, and Russians who were involved somehow in the deal. I agree with you.
They care about childhood obesity.
I agree with you. I agree with you that it is dubious. Although I don't agree that just giving money to a charity somehow influenced the Clintons.
Just saying.
I think
stop pretending. They're not giving the money because they care about childhood obesity or cholera. They're giving because they want the deal to go through. You know that.
Well, I don't think it's fair for you to say that Bill and Hillary Clinton don't care about some of the charitable purposes that money went to. But the more concerning issue is that Bill Clinton took speaker fees from a Russian investment firm that was also involved in this deal in 2010, near the time that this was
approved.
And that is more significant. But the question is, did Bill influence Hillary, and did Hillary influence the CFIUS committee, and did she somehow influence the other 8 people? And there's no evidence of that.
Everything about it, from the policy to the payoffs, is sleazy and wrong, and you're basically admitting that, and I appreciate it.
The policy is bad. Right. There's nothing illegal. There's no evidence of illegal activity.
Bring us back.
Yes.
David DeVore, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
How did Harvey Weinstein's behavior go unreported for so long? Up next, new information on how the New York Times killed that story, the original story, more than 10 years ago, from the reporter who wrote it, who joins us next. There are still a lot of unanswered questions in the Harvey Weinstein scandal, but only a few of them involve Weinstein himself. Instead, the biggest question now is how so many people, including smart ones, journalists, actors, producers, knew about Weinstein's behavior and yet didn't reveal it for years. Sharon Waxman is the founder of The Wrap, but before that, she was at the New York Times as a reporter, and she was ready to expose Weinstein's deeds 13 years ago, and yet editors scuttled her story. Now she says that story was killed after Weinstein himself came to the New York Times newsroom to argue against it. Sharon Waxman joins us tonight for the second time. Sharon, thanks a lot for coming back. I'm glad you came because I think this is one of the most interesting stories. Not that the New York Times is, I mean, they in the end revealed it. They're not solely at fault here, but it's kind of a window into how this story didn't come out earlier, and you were at the center of it. What do you know now that you didn't know when last we talked about why your story didn't run?
Well, I had heard at the time that Harvey had come to the newsroom, and I said that in the post that I originally wrote, which basically called out the fact that the New York Times was, to my mind, kind of self-congratulating in saying nobody else in the media was going to reveal this until we did, and that was what propelled me to say, hey guys, actually we did try to get this story in the paper 13 years ago, and what ended up appearing in print was really way diminished and didn't have context and didn't really make any sense. And what my understanding is that Harvey Weinstein went to war to get this not to appear in the New York Times, which is of course what he does. And I had said at the time that Matt Damon called me, which I knew, Russell Crowe called me, which I knew, and that I'd heard that Harvey Weinstein had visited the newsroom in an attempt to sway the editors not to run the story or to kill the story. So I was told Gene Baquet from the New York Times went on the record and said he spoke to the former editor and managing editor, Bill Keller and Jill Abramson, and they had no recollection of any such meeting. And I thought, wow, I guess I must have a really bad memory. So in the meantime, now 3 different people have come forward to say, no, yes, there was a meeting, and in fact, this sort of colorful detail that Harvey Weinstein and David Boies, his lawyer, and a spokesman for the company were circling the New York Times in a town car, desperately trying to get a meeting with Bill Keller until they got one, and that they came into the newsroom and it was the talk of the building, and I don't know what the conversation was, but obviously they were not exchanging recipes. So again, let me be clear, that doesn't mean that they swayed Bill Keller, the editor at the time, but again, it's just my pointing out the New York Times doesn't like anyone to call them out on things. I get that, but it is true that that meeting happened, that both Bill Keller and Jill Abramson said they have no recollection ever occurred. The meeting did occur, there was severe pressure, and all I know is that my story appeared without any reference to women or sexual anything at all.
That's unbelievable. By the way, we should say, in case our viewers missed it, the New York Times did attack you personally after you noted that your original story had been altered to take out all the interesting stuff. Do you think it's plausible, rhetorical question here, that you could forget a meeting with David Boies and Harvey Weinstein in your own newsroom?
That's an interesting question. Well, what Bill Keller came back and said to me was somewhat equivocal. He said, I do remember that there was a meeting with Harvey Weinstein and David Boies, but I think it was about a different story in 2007. So I came back to him and I said, no, Bill, that may well be that you had that meeting, but what I'm asking about is specifically this meeting in 2004 in the fall. 3 people remember it, including my former editor. And he chose not to answer. And basically he's just saying, I'm sour grapes, I didn't get the story, which is not what it's about for me. It's about whether we could have exposed this earlier and perhaps saved some women the suffering or the trials of having been preyed upon. And I didn't have the whole story. I'm not trying to assert that, but what the story I had to do with a guy in Italy who was on the Disney payroll, whose job was essentially to procure women for him. And now there's a ton of women coming out and corroborating that story.
Right. It would have changed everything if that had run. You're obviously a dogged reporter. Thank you for filling us in on what you've learned since then. Sharon Waxman, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Tucker.
Several women at this point have accused Harvey Weinstein of rape, and now it appears possible those accusations could become criminal charges. An unnamed model and actress who says Weinstein raped her in 2013 spoke with the LAPD for 2 hours this morning. Meanwhile, it's also been reported that Weinstein could be prosecuted for rape in the state of Utah, where he allegedly raped actress Rose McGowan way back in 1997. Emily Compagno is an attorney, and she joins us tonight. So Emily is, as a non-lawyer, my understanding is there's no statute of limitations on rape charges. Is that right?
It depends on the state. So in 2008, Utah did away with the statute of limitations for rape, and that is why they have a small legal loophole that matters here. They have what's known as absentee tolling. So if someone is accused of a crime in the state of Utah but leaves the state's borders, the statute of limitations stops until and unless they return to that state. So all that matters here for Weinstein to be able to be prosecuted in that state is that Rose McGowan's case was ripe for prosecution in 2008 when they did away with rape statute of limitations. And because of this absentee tolling, then that's possible. So not only would it be a refreshing relief, frankly, for a state to prosecute him, but it would also be legally sound. Now, there have been constitutional challenges to this, but the Utah Supreme Court has ruled specifically of this pattern, this fact pattern, on behalf of the victim and the DA. And the United States Supreme Court has ruled that this violence against women in state borders is not subject to the Commerce Clause. So that means that that constitutional arguments on Weinstein's behalf, touching on federalism, that it won't work here. It's just civil and corporate precedent. So here it will be sound.
So it sounds like he could end up in jail. Could the state of Utah, for example, bring charges against him without the cooperation of Rose McGowan? Would she have to agree to testify against him, or could they go ahead anyway?
They can go ahead anyway. And, you know, of course, historical crimes, as they're called, which are ones in the past, they're difficult to prosecute because there's witness corroboration that pales in memory and credibility, let alone whether a victim fails to testify. But that being said, you know, a 20-year-old rape is just as deserving of prosecution and punishment as a recent one, and the Utah DA can absolutely proceed.
Boy, this is growing in directions I bet he did not expect when that New York Times piece came out. Emily, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, the shooting in Las Vegas, the aftermath, ought to be a search for truth. So why is MGM, the casino company, letting it become a battle for the bottom line? There's a lot of PR machinations going on you may not be aware of. So up next, we want to tell you about the bizarre way the Mandalay Bay security guard, Jesus Campos, was apparently manipulated by MGM and Ellen DeGeneres. An amazing story. Stay tuned. We still don't have answers to even basic questions about the massacre in Las Vegas, but we do have a lot of questions. Jesus Campos emerged publicly for the first time this week. He was the only eyewitness, certainly the first, to the shooting at that hotel from within the building. He gave an interview on the Ellen DeGeneres show, but bizarrely, the whole interview apparently was part of a marketing push by MGM, which owns Mandalay Bay and, among other things, operates several Ellen-themed slot machines. Watch.
I have a brand new slot machine. It is from IGT, and it's got new bonuses that are so much fun. I was in Vegas, and I went to the MGM Grand, and I surprised some people who were playing my machine, and here's what happened. Wild! Come on! Take her! Oh, my God!
So now the Daily Mail is reporting that MGM, the company, makes those slot machines, insisted that Campos appear only on Ellen DeGeneres' show, fearing that his responses to any other interviewers, real ones, could alter the public perception of the shooting timeline and affect their legal position. Chris Spargo is a Daily Mail reporter, and he joins us tonight. So, Chris, this sounds like part of a, I don't know if cover-up is too strong or not, but part of a marketing effort. This sounds designed to spin rather than explain the facts to the public.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, we heard last week that Jesus Campos was going to give 5 interviews on Thursday, and after 2.5 weeks, we were all looking for answers. There's just so many things that are still lingering about this shooting. And then a few days before, he just disappears, and we don't hear anything at all. And then we learn on Tuesday night that he's going to do Ellen DeGeneres of all shows. Now, we spoke to a TV insider who confirmed to us that this was all MGM. They were concerned about the timeline, which keeps changing in this case, and that Jesus would not be able to keep it straight if he was put on very hard talk shows or news organizations were going to pressure him about it.
I mean, look, I feel for Campos. He didn't do anything wrong. He's walking by, shot or hit by a ricochet. I'm still not clear exactly what happened. So I'm not attacking him in any way, just asking an honest question when I ask you, why is he a hero exactly? Ellen DeGeneres did this whole thing, you're a hero, and we love you, we're celebrating you. According to the timeline, where's the hero part come in? I'm honestly confused. What does that mean?
Well, that's the whole thing, too. I mean, the original timeline had him showing up at 10:14, a minute before the shooting stopped. Then the second timeline came out, which is when he was heralded as a hero, which said that he arrived at 9:59, which was 6 minutes before the shooting started. Now, that's a timeline that caused all these problems, where people were saying if he was there 6 minutes before, and it took police all this time to get to the room, then there was clearly some miscommunication. Right. Did he phone into MGM, and did MGM not tell the police? What's going on here? And now you have victims, families, other people who were shot, thinking, well, if you didn't call the police for 6 minutes, what could have been saved if this hadn't happened?
Okay. Have we settled on a timeline exactly, or have authorities given us a definitive timeline that makes sense?
So here's the other part, is that Jesus' interviews are going to be Thursday. Well, on Friday, after those interviews get canceled, we get a third timeline. Now, this timeline has him arriving just as the shooting starts, the police arriving at 10:17 in a reasonable amount of time. MGM is okay with that. Police are okay with that. Everyone seems to have, worked in proper ways and through protocol.
Okay. So, and we're certain that's real? I mean, there are federal investigators presumably at the heart of this investigation, the FBI. They introduced themselves to us on television a couple of weeks ago. What are they saying? Has anybody come out to say, look, there's a lot of confusion here, but we're saying definitively we know this?
I mean, you can't say definitively at this point because it's changed so much in the past 2 weeks. There's still, like we said, so many questions about this, and every single version keeps changing. So no one's really saying a lot right now, but as of Friday, that's what they're saying is the definitive for now.
Has law enforcement said anything about the fact that MGM, a for-profit company in whose hotel this tragedy took place, is controlling the narrative here?
We couldn't get any response, and we asked about that. We said, why are you changing this timeline? The way it's happening is weird. The timing is very, suspect, but no response whatsoever.
Yeah. So, there's a huge crime, biggest shooting in modern American history. Let's let a casino company tell us what happened.
Exactly.
Yeah, good idea. Okay, Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Puerto Rico is still having a very tough time after Hurricane Maria. Is that because the island is badly run, poorly prepared? The storm was terrible because President Trump is a racist. A lot of politics around that hurricane. We'll get to the bottom of all of it coming up next. Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico a month ago pretty hard. But the political battle over rebuilding the island continues. Prior to a meeting with the Puerto Rican governor, Ricardo Rossello, today, President Trump rated the American response to the disaster a perfect 10 out of 10. A lot of people not only disagree with that, they say the relief effort is subpar specifically because Trump is racist against Puerto Ricans. Watch.
There is this double standard, which I really believe is bigoted in terms of the response that he has to Puerto Ricans.
He's talking to his electoral base. He's not talking about law or about history. He's showing up that he's just racist. Let's call it the right name.
You have Hispanics in Puerto Rico. He sees them as the others, not his white supporters. These are people that do not look like the overwhelming majority of his donors.
God, there are a lot of dumb people on TV. Is Trump actually bungling a hurricane response just because he's a racist cartoon? Evangeline Gomez is an attorney and Democratic commentator. She joins us tonight. Evangeline, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you.
So if you're going to make the case that the federal government is screwing up a response to a hurricane, you know, I'm absolutely willing to believe that. I've seen that. They screw up a lot of things. I just don't understand the evidence for racism in this. That seems an entirely different category. Why is this racist?
Well, to the people who make that argument, they've seen his tweets. The tweets basically implying that Puerto Ricans were lazy. They weren't helping one another. They were depending on the federal government to help them when they could have done these things themselves, which was impossible. And today, when he spoke with Governor Rossello, he admitted it. You know, this is an unprecedented situation. It's worse than Katrina. Those were Trump's words, exactly. And so the tweets, the throwing of the paper rolls, that made people there feel like, what, do you think we're beneath you? Why are we getting this type of treatment? That and the delay. There are some people who think that the delay occurred because Puerto Ricans are different somewhat culturally, different surnames, speak a different language, because they're removed, and because he does not view them as a state, and because they don't have the political power. They don't have electoral votes. Maybe if they had electoral votes, they would have received a different response. These are the arguments that are out there.
But can I just point out that they're actually not a state? It's not a state. It's a colony. It's a territory. That's a whole separate conversation. I'm not sure why the left suddenly supports colonialism, but whatever you do. But Puerto Rico, hold on, as a factual matter, Puerto Rico is 75% white, according to the U.S. Census. So I'm not sure how it's... I'm reading the census numbers. I'm not sure how that's racist. I mean, maybe he doesn't like Puerto Ricans, or maybe he did a bad job. That's all fair, but
you know,
racist?
Actually, Tucker, that's a great point that you bring up, because a lot of people don't understand that in Puerto Rico, you have the mixture of the African culture, the Indian Taino culture, and European culture. So there are many people, I mean, such as myself, I look at my background, I have Asian, I have Chinese in me. You know, there's a mixture of people, ethnicities, races. So you really can't say, I'm white, I'm black, I'm other. I mean, it's very complex when it comes to the Puerto Rican identity.
You're sort of making my point. It's very complex. I mean, the census is self-reported. So 75% of the people on Puerto Rico said, I'm white. Okay?
Well, that's a reporting, and that's based on the census, and, you know, what does white mean?
Okay, but that's what the people say they are. And so I'm only saying, look, I'm not defending the federal response to anything. I would never do that. I always assume it's going to be lame and late. Though, by the way, the DOD and FEMA were there before the storm, just so you know. But the race angle bothers me because it's unfounded. It makes people hate each other, and it's just stupid. This is a place that's more white than many U.S. states, including our biggest state, California,
including Texas. I disagree with you saying that. I mean, they're Latino, they're Hispanic. There's a difference between white and Hispanic and Latino.
What's the difference, then? What's the difference?
They're Hispanic. They're Latino.
So what is the difference?
They speak a different language.
Language isn't a race.
It's not. Language is not a race. Language is a language.
Right. So what's the difference?
The issue here is that many people feel that the response
was delayed.
The response was delayed.
Okay. So here's
and there are people, if you speak to relatives of people who are living in Puerto Rico and people in Puerto Rico, depending on who you ask, people are going to say it was not a 10.
Okay, but
there's still people with no electricity, contaminated water.
Look, I get it. It's not a surprise. Or Houston, Katrina. There are lots of responses the federal government's laid on. It's when you start alleging a conspiracy based on racism that it scares the hell out of people, it divides people, and there's no evidence for it. You've presented none, and that crosses a line.
That's not my argument. I did not say it was based on race. That is not my argument. You asked me why people were making this argument, and I explained to you why some people felt that way. That is it. Maybe some people should use the term bigotry. So I did not say that was my response.
But I'm wondering why, if we're against colonialism, that we maintain Puerto Rico as a colony. Why can't Puerto Rico become a country? I don't really understand that. What's the justification for keeping a country in this weird I'm serious, in this weird half-light where you don't pay federal income taxes, but you are American citizens, but you can't vote when you're on the island? I mean, this is colonialism.
Last election, Tucker, pardon me, but in the last election, they voted to become a state. Many people there voted for Puerto Rico to become a part of the United States. So that's exactly the reality right now, and that's something that should be discussed. A reporter today brought up that question to Trump. He said he couldn't speak about it because it was political, but these are the conversations that should be going on.
Yeah, instead of just making excuses for colonialism.
It's not lesser than Florida. They're Americans. They're U.S. citizens. Jones Act.
Yeah,
they
don't pay federal income taxes, so, I mean, I don't know. It's a little more complicated, as you would put it. Evangeline, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tucker. You have a great night.
Time for final exam. Who will triumph in our meeting of the news experts? If you're mad at the media, you might want to watch this. We'll be right back. So if you're mad at the media, this is your catharsis. It's time for Final Exam, where we test which of our news experts actually reads the news. Joining us this week, Catherine Lyons, managing editor at Famous DC, as well as Fox correspondent Peter Doocy. Are you ready?
No.
Good.
We
were supposed to read the news?
You were supposed to not simply report it, but read it. And we're going to find out if you have. Okay, put your hands on the buzzers. I'm going to ask a series of questions. The first one of you who buzzes in gets to answer first. You must wait until I finish asking the question in order to do that. Every correct answer is worth 1 point. If you get it wrong, you lose a point. Best of 5 wins. Are you prepared?
Not really.
No. Good. That's exactly how we like it. First question. Despite speculation of a 2020 presidential run, which media mogul said this week she has zero interest in becoming the next president?
It's Oprah.
Oh.
Oprah, says Peter Doocy. To the tape we go.
I'm wondering if you've narrowed down your short list of VP candidates. Oh, she's lost her mind now. There will be no running for office of any kind for me.
But she's still going to be on the cover of her magazine every week. That's just a guess. Peter Doocy, the first question goes to you. Nice.
I didn't know you were finished.
I know. Okay.
I was being polite.
I'm going to be more definitive at the period this time. Question 2. There was a 4-legged animal on the loose in Brooklyn, New York this week after escaping a slaughterhouse. What kind of animal was it? Peter Doocy again, the first to buzz in.
It was a bull.
It was a bull.
It was a bull.
We're going to go to the tape and see if you're right.
We'll tell you about another attempt to outrun the cops. It's the bull versus the cops in Brooklyn. Go bull! A bull got cut loose from a slaughterhouse, chased him through Prospect Park. A bunch of people stopped to watch. Of course, it's Brooklyn, so a bunch of people didn't notice.
So you're watching Shepherd in the daytime, apparently. Though, by the way, slaughterhouse to tip off. I mean, it wasn't a horse. This is not France. You know, it had to be a bull, right?
This is bull. I think my buzzer's broken.
I think it may be, actually. All right, a little faster this time, Catherine. Quick reaction, okay? Ready?
It's the end of the day.
Question 3. A barely recognizable Christian Bale, who is an actor, was spotted this week filming his new movie where he's playing which former vice president of the United States? Go. Peter Doocy again.
Is your buzzer not working? Because if your buzzer is not working...
I felt a bit of a delayed reaction.
Okay.
I am saying it's broken.
You're saying it's good. Go with that. Go with the broken.
It's Peter? Cheney. Richard Cheney.
Richard Cheney. Richard B. Cheney. To the tape.
Christian Bale spotted in full makeup and wardrobe to play former Vice President Dick Cheney.
Amazing. I thought for a second that Christian Bale was playing Stuart Barney.
That is good.
Really?
Okay, that's pretty good. Catherine, yeah, I know the chips are down. This looks like your Waterloo, but I think it's at least mathematically possible for you to still win if Peter messes up and you prevail. So quick on that. Ready? Question 4. This one's a multiple choice question. National Geographic has released its list of the happiest cities in America. The winner this year is which city in Colorado? A, Denver, B, Aspen, C, Boulder. Catherine Lyons.
Boulder.
Boulder, Colorado, says Catherine Lyons. To the tape we go.
People bike there as opposed to driving. The streets are made for humans and not just for cars. There's no billboards. And it also happens to be the place that produces arguably the most Olympic athletes in the country.
The answer, Boulder, Colorado.
Yes, finally.
But do they have bulls running in those streets that are built?
That's why they're so happy.
They said that one of the selling points for Boulder is that the streets were built for humans as opposed to built for what?
That's it. Well, by the way, Aspen's a lot happier than Boulder, but nobody can afford to live there, so just to make you feel better. Like, people are enraged over an immigration-themed costume being sold at Party City. Which controversial costume are most people being the left, most upset about? Peter Doocy.
It's the wall.
The wall. There's a wall costume. Before we even go to the tape, can I just ask for the sake of just kind of interested, do you agree with that, the wall? If you'd won, what would you have guessed?
I don't disagree.
I don't disagree. Safe answer. You're a natural Washingtonian. Okay, to the tape.
Party City is being called for a party foul for selling a costume of Donald Trump's controversial border wall. Men have complained it's insensitive. And women are complaining because there's no way to make a slutty border wall.
So, by the way, there probably is. The wall. You were right, Peter Doocy. How'd you know that?
Because it's almost Halloween, and I am investigating all all costumes themed for things that I've heard chanted.
You've been
at
watching old
political
Kennedy over on Fox Business. I like it. Great anchor. Thank you both very much. Peter, you win. Consolation prize goes to you.
Participation
Kathy, that's
trophy.
exactly right.
That's all I want.
First we have to make one, but we will give it to you when we do. That's it for this week's Final Exam. Pay attention to the news over the next week. You can play along for another edition next Thursday right here on the Fox News Channel. Stay tuned. Ann Arbor, Michigan is famous for a lot of things. Smug Midwestern liberals too terrified to live in Detroit or Chicago. A public university in steep decline. The state's second best football program. Now the city is famous for one more thing, bizarre virtue signaling. 4 city council members in Ann Arbor showed solidarity with embattled NFL millionaires, perhaps the most entitled class on planet Earth, by kneeling for the Pledge of Allegiance during a council meeting this week. One councilman says the stunt wasn't about disrespecting the flag or police officers, though of course that's the entire point of the kneeling campaign. On the plus side, if they can focus on things like this, it means Ann Arbor has literally no other problem, so congratulations. That's it for us tonight. Every night at 8, the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. The great Sean Hannity is next in New York. Hey, Sean.